Chapter 22 of 8 Cousins by Louisa May Alcott. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 22 Something to Do. Whatever danger there might have been from the effects of that sudden chill, it was soon over, though, of course, Aunt Myra refused to believe it, and Dr. Alec cherished his girl with redoubled vigilance and tenderness for months afterward. Rose quite enjoyed being sick, because as soon as the pain ended, the fun began, and for a week or two she led the life of a little princess, secluded in the bower, while everyone served, amused, and watched over her in the most delightful manner. But the doctor was called away to see an old friend who was dangerously ill, and then Rose felt like a young bird deprived of its mother's sheltering wing, especially on one afternoon when the aunts were taking their naps, and the house was very still within, while snow fell softly without.
"I'll go and hunt up Phoebe. She is always nice and busy, and likes to have me help her. If Dolly is out of the way, we can make caramels and surprise the boys when they come,"
Rose said to herself as she threw down her book and felt ready for society of some sort. She took the precaution to peep through the slide before she entered the kitchen, for Dolly allowed no messing when she was round. But the coast was clear, and no one but Phoebe appeared, sitting at the table with her head on her arms, apparently asleep. Rose was just about to wake her with a
"Boo,"
when she lifted her head, dried her wet eyes with her blue apron, and fell to work with a resolute face on something she was evidently much interested in. Rose could not make out what it was, and her curiosity was greatly excited, for Phoebe was writing with a sputtering pen on some bits of brown paper, apparently copying something from a little book.
"I must know what the dear thing is about and why she cried, and then set her lips tight and went to work with all her might,"
thought Rose, forgetting all about the caramels, and, going round to the door, she entered the kitchen, saying pleasantly,
"Phoebe, I want to do something. Can you let me help you about anything, or shall I be in the way?"
"Oh dear no, miss. I always love to have you round when things are tidy. What would you like to do?"
answered Phoebe, opening a drawer as if about to sweep her own affairs out of sight. But Rose stopped her, exclaiming, like a curious child,
"Let me see. What is it? I won't tell if you'd rather not have Dolly know."
"I'm only trying to study a bit, but I'm so stupid I don't get on much,"
answered the girl reluctantly, permitting her little mistress to examine the poor contrivances she was trying to work with. A broken slate that had blown off the roof, an inch or two of pencil, an old almanac for a reader, several bits of brown or yellow paper ironed smoothly and sewn together for a copybook, and the copies, sundry receipts written in Aunt Plenty's neat hand. These, with a small bottle of ink and a rusty pen, made up Phoebe's outfit, and it was little wonder that she did not get on, in spite of the patient persistence that dried the desponding tears and drove along the sputtering pen with a will.
"You may laugh if you want to, Miss Rose. I know my things are queer, and that's why I hide 'em. But I don't mind since you found me out, and I ain't a bit ashamed except of being so backward at my age,"
said Phoebe humbly, though her cheeks grew redder as she washed out some crooked capitals with a tear or two not yet dried upon the slate.
"Laugh at you? I feel more like crying to think what a selfish girl I am, to have loads of books and things and never remember to give you some. Why didn't you come and ask me, and not go struggling along alone in this way? It was very wrong of you, Phoebe, and I'll never forgive you if you do so again,"
answered Rose, with one hand on Phoebe's shoulder, while the other gently turned the leaves of the poor little copybook.
I don't like to ask for anything more when you are so good to me all the time, Miss dear,
began Phoebe, looking up with grateful eyes.
Oh, you proud thing. Just as if it wasn't fun to give away. And I had the best of it. Now see here, I've got a plan, and you mustn't say no, or I shall scold. I want something to do, and I'm going to teach you all I know. It won't take long.
And Rose laughed as she put her arm around Phoebe's neck and patted the smooth dark head with the kind little hand that so loved to give.
It would be just heavenly.
And Phoebe's face shone at the mere idea, but fell again as she added wistfully,
Only, I'm afraid I ought not to let you do it, Miss Rose. It will take time, and maybe the doctor wouldn't like it.
He didn't want me to study much, but he never said a word about teaching, and I don't believe he will mind a bit. Anyway, we can try it till he comes. So pack up your things and go right to my room, and we'll begin this very day. I'd truly like to do it, and we'll have nice times. See if we don't,
cried Rose eagerly. It was a pretty sight to see Phoebe bundle her humble outfit into her apron and spring up as if the desire of her heart had suddenly been made a happy fact to her. It was a still prettier sight to see Rose run gaily on before, smiling like a good fairy as she beckoned to the other, singing as she went,
The way into my parlor is up a winding stair, and many are the curious things I'll show you when you're there. Will you walk in, Phoebe dear?
Oh, won't I?
answered Phoebe fervently, adding as they entered the bower,
You are the dearest spider that ever was, and I'm the happiest fly.
I'm going to be very strict, so sit down in that chair and don't say a word till school is ready to open,
ordered Rose, delighted with the prospect of such a useful and pleasant something to do. So Phoebe sat demurely in her place, while her new teacher laid forth books and slates, a pretty inkstand and a little globe, hastily tore a bit off her big sponge, sharpened pencils with more energy than skill, and when all was ready, gave a prance of satisfaction that set the pupil laughing.
Now the school is open, and I shall hear you read, so that I may know in which class to put you, Miss Moore,
began Rose with great dignity, as she laid a book before her scholar and sat down in the easy chair with a long rule in her hand. Phoebe did pretty well, only tripping now and then over a hard word, and pronouncing identical in a sober way that tickled Rose, though never a smile betrayed her. The spelling lesson which followed was rather discouraging. Phoebe's ideas of geography were very vague, and grammar was nowhere, though the pupil protested that she tried so hard to
talk nice like educated folks,
that Dolly called her
a stuck-up piece who didn't know her place.
Dolly's an old goose, so don't you mind her, for she will say nater, victuals, and dues as long as she lives, and insist that they are right. You do talk very nicely, Phoebe. I've observed it, and grammar will help you and show you some things are right and others ain't. Are not, I mean,
added Rose, correcting herself, and feeling that she must mind her own parts of speech if she was to serve as an example for Phoebe. When the arithmetic came, the little teacher was surprised to find her scholar quicker in some things than herself, for Phoebe had worked away at the columns in the butcher's and baker's books till she could add so quickly and correctly that Rose was amazed, and felt that in this branch the pupil would soon excel the teacher if she kept on at the same pace. Her praise cheered Phoebe immensely, and they went bravely on, both getting so interested that time flew unheeded till Aunt Plenty appeared, exclaiming as she stared at the two heads bent over one slate,
"Bless my heart, what is going on now?"
School, Auntie. I'm teaching Phoebe, and it's great fun,
cried Rose, looking up with a bright face. But Phoebe's was brighter, though she added with a wistful look,
Maybe I ought to have asked leave first. Only when Miss Rose proposed this, I was so happy I forgot to. Shall I stop, ma'am?
Of course not, child. I'm glad to see you fond of your book and to find Rose helping you along. My blessed mother used to sit at work with her maids about her, teaching them many a useful thing in the good old fashion that's gone by now. Only don't neglect your work, dear, or let the books interfere with the duties.
As Aunt Plenty spoke, with her kind old face beaming approvingly upon the girls, Phoebe glanced at the clock, saw that it pointed to 5, knew that Dolly would soon be down expecting to find preparations for supper underway, and, hastily dropping her pencil, she jumped up, saying,
Please, can I go? I'll clear up after I've done my chores.
School is dismissed,
answered Rose, and with a grateful,
Thank you heaps and heaps.
Phoebe ran away, singing the multiplication table as she set the tea ditto. That was the way it began, and for a week the class of 1 went on with great pleasure and profit to all concerned, for the pupil proved a bright one and came to her lessons as to a feast, while the young teacher did her best to be worthy the high opinion held of her, for Phoebe firmly believed that Miss Rose knew everything in the way of learning. Of course, the lads found out what was going on, and chaffed the girls about the seminary, as they called the new enterprise. But they thought it a good thing on the whole, kindly offered to give lessons in Greek and Latin gratis, and decided among themselves that Rose was a little trump to give the Phoebe birds such a capital boost. Rose herself had some doubts as to how it would strike her uncle, and concocted a wheedlesome speech which should at once convince him that it was the most useful, wholesome, and delightful plan ever devised. But she got no chance to deliver her address, for Dr. Alec came upon her so unexpectedly that it went out of her head entirely. She was sitting on the floor in the library, poring over a big book laid open in her lap, and knew nothing of the long-desired arrival till 2 large, warm hands met under her chin and gently turned her head back so that someone could kiss her heartily on either cheek, while a fatherly voice said, half reproachfully,
Why is my girl brooding over a dusty encyclopedia when she ought to be running to meet the old gentleman who couldn't get on another minute without her?
Oh, Uncle, I'm so glad, and so sorry. Why didn't you let us know what time you'd be here, or call out the minute you came? Haven't I been homesick for you? And now I'm so happy to have you back, I could hug your dear old curly head off.
cried Rose as the encyclopedia went down with a bang, and she up with a spring that carried her into Dr. Alec's arms, to be kept there in the sort of embrace a man gives to the dearest creature the world holds for him. Presently he was in his easy-chair, with Rose upon his knee, smiling up in his face and talking as fast as her tongue could go, while he watched her with an expression of supreme content as he stroked the smooth, round cheek or held the little hand in his, rejoicing to see how rosy was the one, how plump and strong the other.
Have you had a good time? Did you save the poor lady? Aren't you glad to be home again with your girl to torment you?
Yes, to all those questions. Now, tell me what you have been at, little sinner. Auntie Plen says you want to consult me about some new and remarkable project which you have dared to start in my absence.
She didn't tell you, I hope.
Not a word more except that you were rather doubtful how I'd take it, and so wanted to fess yourself and get round me as you always try to do, though you don't often succeed. Now then, own up and take the consequences.
So Rose told about her school in her pretty, earnest way, dwelling on Phoebe's hunger for knowledge and the delight it was to help her, adding with a wise nod,
And it helps me too, Uncle, for she is so quick and eager I have to do my best, or she will get ahead of me in some ways. Today now, she had the word cotton in a lesson and asked all about it, and I was amazed to find I really knew so little that I could only say it was a plant that grew down south in a kind of a pod and was made into cloth. That was what I was reading when you came, and tomorrow I shall tell her all about it, and Indigo too. So you see, it teaches me also, and is as good as a general review of what I've learned, in a pleasanter way than going over it alone.
You artful little baggage. That's the way you expect to get round me, is it? That's not studying, I suppose.
No, sir, it's teaching. And please, I like it much better than having a good time by myself. Besides, you know, I adopted Phoebe and promised to be a sister to her, so I'm bound to keep my word, am I not?
Answered Rose, looking both anxious and resolute as she waited for her sentence. Dr. Alec was evidently already won, for Rose had described the old slate and brown paper copybook with pathetic effect. And the excellent man had not only decided to send Phoebe to school long before the story was done, but reproached himself for forgetting his duty to one little girl in his love for another. So when Rose tried to look meek and failed utterly, he laughed and pinched her cheek and answered in that genial way which adds such warmth and grace to any favor.
I haven't the slightest objection in the world. In fact, I was beginning to think I might let you go at your books again, moderately, since you are so well. This is an excellent way to try your powers. Phoebe is a brave, bright lass, and she'll have a fair chance in the world if we can give it to her, so that if she ever finds her friends, they need not be ashamed of her.
I think she has found some already,
began Rose eagerly.
Eh? What? Has anyone turned up since I've been gone?
Asked Dr. Alec quickly, for it was a firm belief in the family that Phoebe would prove to be somebody sooner or later.
No, her best friend turned up when you came home, Uncle,
answered Rose with an approving pat, adding gratefully,
I can't half thank you for being so good to my girl, but she will, because I know she is going to make a woman to be proud of. She's so strong and true and loving.
Bless your dear heart, I haven't begun to do anything yet. More shame to me. But I'm going at it now, and as soon as she gets on a bit, she shall go to school as long as she likes. How will that do for a beginning?
It will be just heavenly, as Phoebe says, for it is the wish of her life to get lots of schooling, and she will be too happy when I tell her. May I, please? It will be so lovely to see the dear thing open her big eyes and clap her hands at the splendid news.
No one shall have a finger in this nice little pie. You shall do it all yourself. Only don't go too fast, or make too many castles in the air, my dear. For time and patience must go into this pie of ours if it is to turn out well.
Yes, Uncle. Only, when it is opened, won't the birds begin to sing?
Laughed Rose, taking a turn about the room as a vent for the joyful emotions that made her eyes shine. All of a sudden, she stopped and asked soberly,
If Phoebe goes to school, who will do her work? I'm willing if I can.
Come here, and I'll tell you a secret. Dolly's bones are getting so troublesome, and her dear old temper so bad, that the aunts have decided to pension her off, and let her go and live with her daughter, who is married very well. I saw her this week, and she'd like to have her mother come, so in the spring we shall have a grand change, and get a new cook and chamber girl, if any can be found to suit our honoured relatives.
Oh, me! How can I ever get on without Phoebe? Can't she stay, just so I could see her? I'd pay her board rather than have her go, I'm so fond of her.
How Dr. Alec laughed at that proposal, and how satisfied Rose was when he explained that Phoebe was still to be her maid, with no duties except such as she could easily perform between school hours.
She is a proud creature for all her humble ways, and even from us would not take a favour if she did not earn it somewhere. So this arrangement makes it all square and comfortable, you see. and she will pay for the schooling by curling these Goldilocks 12 times a day if you'll let her.
Your plans are always so wise and kind. That's why they work so well, I suppose, and why people let you do what you like with them. I really don't see how other girls get along without an Uncle Alec,"
answered Rose with a sigh of pity for those who had missed so great a blessing. When Phoebe was told the splendid news, she did not stand on her head with rapture, as Charlie prophesied she would, but took it quietly because it was such a happy thing she had no words.
"Big and beautiful enough to thank them in,"
she said, but every hour of her day was brightened by this granted wish and dedicated to the service of those who gave it. Her heart was so full of content that it overflowed in music, and the sweet voice singing all about the house gave thanks so blithely that no other words were needed. Her willing feet were never tired of taking steps for those who had smoothed her way. Her skillful hands were always busy in some labor of love for them, and on the face fast growing in comeliness there was an almost womanly expression of devotion, which proved how well Phoebe had already learned one of life's great lessons: gratitude. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of 8 Cousins by Louisa May Alcott. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 23. Peacemaking.
"Steve, I want you to tell me something,"
said Rose to Dandy, who was making faces at himself in the glass while he waited for an answer to the note he brought from his mother to Aunt Plenty.
"Perhaps I will, and perhaps I won't. What is it?"
"Haven't Arch and Charlie quarreled?"
"Dare say. We fellows are always having little rows, you know. I do believe a sty is coming on my starboard eye."
And Steve affected to be absorbed in a survey of his yellow lashes.
"No, that won't do. I want to know all about it, for I'm sure something more serious than a little row is the matter. Come, please tell me, Steenie. There's a dear."
"Botheration! You don't want me to turn telltale, do you?"
growled Steve, pulling his top knot, as he always did when perplexed.
"Yes, I do,"
was Rose's decided answer, for she saw from his manner that she was right, and determined to have the secret out of him if coaxing would do it.
"I don't wish you to tell things to everyone, of course, but to me you may, and you must, because I have a right to know. You boys need somebody to look after you, and I'm going to do it, for girls are nice peacemakers and know how to manage people. Uncle said so, and he is never wrong."
Steve was about to indulge in a derisive hoot at the idea of her looking after them, but a sudden thought restrained him, and suggested a way in which he could satisfy Rose and better himself at the same time.
"What will you give me if I'll tell you every bit about it?"
he asked, with a sudden red in his cheeks and an uneasy look in his eyes, for he was half ashamed of the proposition.
"What do you want?"
And Rose looked up rather surprised at his question.
"I'd like to borrow some money. I shouldn't think of asking you, only Mac never has a cent since he set up his old chemical shop where he'll blow himself to bits someday, and you and Uncle will have the fun of putting him together again."
And Steve tried to look as if the idea amused him.
"I'll lend it to you with pleasure, so tell away,"
said Rose, bound to get at the secret. Evidently much relieved by the promise, Steve set his top knot cheerfully erect again, and briefly stated the case.
"As you say, it's all right to tell you, but don't let the boys know I blabbed, or Prince will take my head off. You see, Archie don't like some of the fellows Charlie goes with, and cuts 'em. That makes Prince mad. And he holds on just to plague Arch, so they don't speak to one another, if they can help it. And that's the row.
Are those boys bad?
asked Rose anxiously.
Guess not. Only rather wild. They're older than our fellows, but they like Prince. He's such a jolly boy. Sings so well, dances jigs and breakdowns, you know, and plays any game that's going. He beat Morse at billiards, and that's something to brag of, for Morse thinks he knows everything. I saw the match, and it was great fun.
Steve got quite excited over the prowess of Charlie, whom he admired immensely and tried to imitate. Rose did not know half the danger of such gifts and tastes as Charlie's, but felt instinctively that something must be wrong if Archie disapproved.
If Prince likes any billiard-playing boy better than Archie, I don't think much of his sense,
she said severely.
Of course he doesn't. But, you see, Charlie and Arch are both as proud as they can be and won't give in. I suppose Arch is right, but I don't blame Charlie a bit for liking to be with the others sometimes. They are such a jolly set.
And Steve shook his head morally, even while his eye twinkled over the memory of some of the exploits of the jolly set.
Oh, dear me,
sighed Rose.
I don't see what I can do about it, but I wish the boys would make up. For Prince can't come to any harm with Archie. He's so good and sensible.
That's the trouble. Arch preaches and Prince won't stand it. He told Arch he was a prig and a parson, and Archie told him he wasn't a gentleman. My boots, weren't they both mad, though? I thought for a minute they'd pitch into one another and have it out. Wish they had, and not gone stalking round stiff and glum ever since. Mac and I settle our rows with a bat or so over the head, and then we are all right.
Rose couldn't help laughing as Steve sparred away at a fat sofa pillow to illustrate his meaning, and, having given it several scientific whacks, he pulled down his cuffs and smiled upon her with benign pity for her feminine ignorance of this summary way of settling a quarrel.
What droll things boys are,
she said, with a mixture of admiration and perplexity in her face, which Steve accepted as a compliment to his sex.
We're a pretty clever invention, miss, and you can't get on without us,
he answered with his nose in the air. Then, taking a sudden plunge into business, he added,
How about that bit of money you were going to lend me? I've told. Now you pay up.
Of course I will. How much do you want?
And Rose pulled out her purse.
Could you spare $5? I want to pay a little debt of honor that is rather pressing.
And Steve put on a mannish air that was comical to see.
Aren't all debts honorable?
asked innocent Rose.
Yes, of course, but this is a bet I made, and it ought to be settled up at once,
began Steve, finding it awkward to explain.
Oh, don't bet. It's not right. And I know your father wouldn't like it. Promise you won't do so again. Please promise.
And Rose held fast the hand into which she had just put the money.
Well, I won't. It's worried me a good deal, but I was joked into it. Much obliged, cousin. I'm all right now.
And Steve departed hastily. Having decided to be a peacemaker, Rose waited for an opportunity, and very soon it came. She was spending the day with Aunt Clara, who had been entertaining some young guests, and invited Rose to meet them, for she thought it high time her niece conquered her bashfulness and saw a little of society. Dinner was over, and everyone had gone. Aunt Clara was resting before going out to an evening party, and Rose was waiting for Charlie to come and take her home. She sat alone in the elegant drawing-room, feeling particularly nice and pretty, for she had her best frock on, a pair of gold bands her aunt had just given her, and a tea-rose bud in her sash, like the beautiful Miss Van Tassel, whom everyone admired. She had spread out her little skirts to the best advantage, and, leaning back in a luxurious chair, sat admiring her own feet in new slippers with rosettes almost as big as dahlias. Presently, Charlie came lounging in, looking rather sleepy and queer, Rose thought. On seeing her, however, he roused up and said with a smile that ended in a gape,
"I thought you were with Mother, so I took 40 winks after I got those girls off. Now, I'm at your service, Rosamunda, whenever you like."
You look as if your head ached. If it does, don't mind me. I'm not afraid to run home alone. It is so early,"
answered Rose, observing the flushed cheeks and heavy eyes of her cousin.
"I think I see myself letting you do it. Champagne always makes my head ache, but the air will set me up."
"Why do you drink it then?"
asked Rose anxiously.
"Can't help it when I'm host. No, don't you begin to lecture. I've had enough of Archie's old-fashioned notions, and I don't want any more."
Charlie's tone was decidedly cross, and his whole manner so unlike his usual merry good nature that Rose felt crushed and answered meekly,
"I wasn't going to lecture, only when people like other people, they can't bear to see them suffer pain."
That brought Charlie round at once, for Rose's lips trembled a little, though she tried to hide it by smelling the flower she pulled from her sash.
"I'm a regular bear, and I beg your pardon for being so cross, Rosie,"
he said in the old frank way that was so winning.
"I wish you'd beg Archie's too, and be good friends again. You never were cross when he was your chum,"
Rose said, looking up at him as he bent toward her from the low chimney-piece where he had been leaning his elbows. In an instant he stood as stiff and straight as a ramrod, and the heavy eyes kindled with an angry spark as he said, in his high and mighty manner,
"You'd better not meddle with what you don't understand, cousin."
"But I do understand, and it troubles me very much to see you so cold and stiff to one another. You always used to be together, and now you hardly speak. You are so ready to beg my pardon, I don't see why you can't beg Archie's if you're in the wrong."
"I'm not."
This was so short and sharp that Rose started, and Charlie added in a calmer but still very haughty tone,
"A gentleman always begs pardon when he has been rude to a lady, but one man doesn't apologize to another man who has insulted him."
"Oh, my heart, what a pepper pot,"
thought Rose, and hoping to make him laugh, she added slyly,
"I was not talking about men, but boys, and one of them a prince, who ought to set a good example to his subjects."
But Charlie would not relent, and tried to turn the subject by saying gravely, as he unfastened the little gold ring from his watch-guard,
"I've broken my word, so I want to give this back and free you from the bargain. I'm sorry, but I think it a foolish promise and don't intend to keep it. Choose a pair of earrings to suit yourself as my forfeit. You have a right to wear them now."
"No, I can only wear one, and that is no use, for Archie will keep his word, I'm sure."
Rose was so mortified and grieved at this downfall of her hopes that she spoke sharply and would not take the ring the deserter offered her. He shrugged his shoulders and threw it into her lap, trying to look cool and careless, but failing entirely, for he was ashamed of himself and out of sorts generally. Rose wanted to cry, but pride would not let her, and, being very angry, she relieved herself by talk instead of tears. Looking pale and excited, she rose out of her chair, cast away the ring, and said in a voice that she vainly tried to keep steady,
"You are not at all the boy I thought you were, and I don't respect you one bit. I've tried to help you be good, and you won't let me, and I shall not try any more. You talk a great deal about being a gentleman, but you are not, for you've broken your word, and I can never trust you again. I don't wish you to go home with me. I'd rather have Mary. Good night."
And with that last dreadful blow, Rose walked out of the room, leaving Charlie as much astonished as if one of his pet pigeons had flown in his face and pecked at him. She was so seldom angry that when her temper did get the better of her, It made a deep impression on the lads, for it was generally a righteous sort of indignation at some injustice or wrongdoing, not childish passion. Her little thunderstorm cleared off in a sob or two as she put on her things in the entry closet, and when she emerged she looked the brighter for the shower. A hasty good night to Aunt Clara, now under the hands of the hairdresser, and then she crept down to find Mary, the maid. But Mary was out, so was the man, and Rose slipped away by the back door, flattering herself that she had escaped the awkwardness of having Charlie for escort. There she was mistaken, however, for the gate had hardly closed behind her when a well-known tramp was heard, and the prince was beside her, saying in a tone of penitent politeness that banished Rose's wrath like magic,
"You needn't speak to me if you don't choose, but I must see you safely home, cousin."
She turned at once, put out her hand, and answered heartily,
"I was the cross one. Please forgive me, and let's be friends again."
Now that was better than a dozen sermons on the beauty of forgiveness, and did Charlie more good, for it showed him how sweet humility was, and proved that Rose practiced as she preached. He shook the hand warmly, then drew it through his arm and said, as if anxious to recover the good opinion with the loss of which he had been threatened,
"Look here, Rosie. I've put the ring back. I'm going to try again. But you don't know how hard it is to stand being laughed at."
"Yes, I do. Annabelle plagues me every time I see her, because I don't wear earrings after all the trouble I had getting ready for them."
But her twaddle isn't half as bad as the chaffing I get. It takes a deal of pluck to hold out when you are told you are tied to an apron string and all that sort of thing.
sighed Charlie.
"I thought you had a deal of pluck, as you call it. The boys all say you are the bravest of the 7.
Said Rose.
So I am about some things, but I cannot bear to be laughed at.
It is hard, but if one is right, won't that make it easier?
Not to me. It might to a pious parson like Arch.
Please don't call him names. I guess he has what is called moral courage, and you physical courage. Uncle explained the difference to me, and moral is the best, though often it doesn't look so,
said Rose thoughtfully. Charlie didn't like that, and answered quickly,
I don't believe he'd stand it any better than I do if he had those fellows at him.
Perhaps that's why he keeps out of their way and wants you to.
Rose had him there, and Charlie felt it, but would not give in just yet, though he was going fast, for somehow, in the dark, he seemed to see things clearer than in the light, and found it very easy to be confidential when it was only Rose.
If he was my brother now, he'd have some right to interfere,
began Charlie in an injured tone.
I wish he was,
cried Rose.
So do I,
answered Charlie, and then they both laughed at his inconsistency. The laugh did them good, and when Prince spoke again, it was in a different tone, pensive, not proud nor perverse.
You see, it's hard upon me that I have no brothers and sisters. The others are better off and needn't go abroad for chums if they don't like. I am all alone, and I'd be thankful, even for a little sister.
Rose thought that very pathetic, and, overlooking the uncomplimentary word even in that last sentence, she said with a timid sort of earnestness that conquered her cousin at once,
Play I was a little sister. I know I'm silly, but perhaps I'm better than nothing, and I dearly love to do it.
So should I, and we will, for you are not silly, my dear, but a very sensible girl, we all think, and I'm proud to have you for a sister. There, now.
And Charlie looked down at the curly head bobbing along beside him, with real affection in his face. Rose gave a skip of pleasure and laid one sealskin mitten over the other on his arm as she said happily,
That's so nice of you. Now you needn't be lonely any more, and I'll try to fill Archie's place till he comes back, for I know he will, as soon as you let him.
Well, I don't mind telling you that while he was my mate, I never missed brothers and sisters, or wanted anyone else. But since he cast me off, I'll be hanged if I don't feel as forlorn as old Crusoe before Friday turned up.
This burst of confidence confirmed Rose in her purpose of winning Charlie's mentor back to him, but she said no more, contented to have done so well. They parted excellent friends, and Prince went home, wondering why
A fellow didn't mind saying things to a girl or woman which they would die before they'd own to another fellow.
Rose also had some sage reflections upon the subject, and fell asleep thinking that there were a great many curious things in this world, and feeling that she was beginning to find out some of them. Next day she trudged up the hill to see Archie, and having told him as much as she thought best about her talk with Charlie, begged him to forget and forgive.
I've been thinking that perhaps I ought to, though I am in the right. I'm no end fond of Charlie, and he's the best-hearted lad alive. But he can't say no, and that will play the mischief with him if he does not take care,
said Archie in his grave, kind way.
While father was home, I was very busy with him, so Prince got into a set I don't like. They try to be fast and think it's manly, and they flatter him and lead him on to do all sorts of things, play for money and bet and loaf about. I hate to have him do so, and tried to stop it, but went to work the wrong way, so we got into a mess.
He is all ready to make up if you don't say much, for he owned to me he was wrong, but I don't think he will own it to you in words,
began Rose.
I don't care for that. If he'll just drop those rowdies and come back, I'll hold my tongue and not preach. I wonder if he owes those fellows money, and so doesn't like to break off till he can pay it. I hope not, but don't dare to ask. Though perhaps Steve knows. He is always after Prince, more's the pity.
And Archie looked anxious.
I think Steve does know, for he talked about debts of honor the day I gave him.
There Rose stopped short and turned scarlet, but Archie ordered her to fess and had the whole story in 5 minutes, for none dared disobey the chief. He completed her affliction by putting a $5 bill into her pocket by main force, looking both indignant and resolute as he said,
Never do so again, but send Steve to me if he is afraid to go to his father. Charlie had nothing to do with that. He wouldn't borrow a penny of a girl, don't think it. But that's the harm he does Steve, who adores him and tries to be like him in all things. Don't say a word. I'll make it all right, and no one shall blame you.
Oh, me. I always make trouble by trying to help and then letting out the wrong thing,
sighed Rose, much depressed by her slip of the tongue. Archie comforted her with the novel remark that it was always best to tell the truth, and made her quite cheerful by promising to heal the breach with Charlie as soon as possible. He kept his word so well that the very next afternoon, as Rose looked out the window, she beheld the joyful spectacle of Archie and Prince coming up the avenue, arm in arm, as of old, talking away as if to make up for the unhappy silence of the past weeks. Rose dropped her work, hurried to the door, and, opening it wide, stood there smiling down upon them so happily that the faces of the lads brightened as they ran up the steps, eager to show that all was well with them.
Here's our little peacemaker,
said Archie, shaking hands with vigor. But Charlie added, with a look that made Rose very proud and happy,
And my little sister.
End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of 8 Cousins by Louisa May Alcott. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 24. Which?
Uncle, I have discovered what girls are made for,
said Rose the day after the reconciliation of Archie and the prince.
Well, my dear, what is it?
Asked Dr. Alec, who was planking the deck, as he called his daily promenade up and down the hall.
To take care of boys,
answered Rose, quite beaming with satisfaction as she spoke.
Phoebe laughed when I told her, and she thought girls had better learn to take care of themselves first, but that's because she hasn't got 7 boy cousins as I have.
She is right, nevertheless, Rosie. And so are you. For the two things go together, and in helping 7 lads you are unconsciously doing much to improve 1 lass,
said Dr. Alec, stopping to nod and smile at the bright-faced figure resting on the old bamboo chair after a lively game of battledore and shuttlecock in place of a run which a storm prevented.
Am I? I'm glad of that, but really, Uncle, I do feel as if I must take care of the boys, for they come to me in all sorts of troubles and ask advice, and I like it so much. Only I don't always know what to do, and I'm going to consult you privately and then surprise them with my wisdom.
All right, my dear. What's the first worry? I see you have something on your little mind, so come and tell Uncle.
Rose put her arm in his and, pacing to and fro, told him all about Charlie, asking what she could do to keep him straight and be a real sister to him.
Could you make up your mind to go and stay with Aunt Clara a month?
Asked the doctor when she ended.
Yes, sir, but I shouldn't like it. Do you really want me to go?
The best cure for Charlie is a daily dose of rose water, or rose and water. Will you go and see that he takes it?
Laughed Dr. Alec.
You mean that if I'm there and try to make it pleasant, he will stay at home and keep out of mischief?
Exactly.
But could I make it pleasant? He would want the boys.
No danger, but he'd have the boys, for they swarm after you like bees after their queen. Haven't you found that out?
Aunt Plen often says they never used to be here half so much before I came, but I never thought I made the difference. It seems so natural to have them around.
Little Modesty doesn't know what a magnet she is. But she will find it out some day.
And the doctor softly stroked the cheek that had grown rosy with pleasure at the thought of being so much loved.
Now you see, if I move the magnet to Aunt Clara's, the lads will go there as sure as iron to steel, and Charlie will be so happy at home he won't care for these mischievous mates of his. I hope,
added the doctor, well knowing how hard it was to wean a 17-year-old boy from his first taste of what is called seeing life, which, alas, often ends in seeing death.
I'll go, Uncle, right away. Aunt Clara is always asking me, and will be glad to get me. I shall have to dress and dine late, and see lots of company and be very fashionable, but I'll try not to let it hurt me. And if I get in a puzzle or worried about anything, I can run to you,
answered Rose, goodwill conquering timidity. So it was decided, and without saying much about the real reason for this visit, Rose was transplanted to Aunt Clara's, feeling that she had a work to do and very eager to do it well. Dr. Alec was right about the bees, for the boys did follow their queen and astonished Mrs. Clara by their sudden assiduity in making calls, dropping into dinner, and getting up evening frolics. Charlie was a devoted host and tried to show his gratitude by being very kind to his little sister, for he guessed why she came, and his heart was touched by her artless endeavors to help him be good. Rose often longed to be back in the old house with the simpler pleasures and more useful duties of the life there, but having made up her mind, in spite of Phoebe, that
girls were made to take care of boys,
her motherly little soul found much to enjoy in the new task she had undertaken. It was a pretty sight to see the one earnest, sweet-faced girl among the flock of tall lads, trying to understand, to help and please them with a patient affection that worked many a small miracle unperceived. Slang, rough manners, and careless habits were banished or bettered by the presence of a little gentlewoman, and all the manly virtues cropping up were encouraged by the hearty admiration bestowed upon them by one whose good opinion all valued more than they confessed, while Rose tried to imitate the good qualities she praised in them, to put away her girlish vanities and fears, to be strong and just, and frank and brave, as well as modest, kind, and beautiful. This trial worked so well that when the month was over, Mac and Steve demanded a visit in their turn, and Rose went, feeling that she would like to hear grim Aunt Jane say, as Aunt Clara did at parting,
"I wish I could keep you all my life, dear."
After Mac and Steve had had their turn, Archie and company bore her away for some weeks, and with them she was so happy, she felt as if she would like to stay forever, if she could have Uncle Alec also. Of course, Aunt Myra could not be neglected, and, with a secret despair, Rose went to the mausoleum, as the boys called her gloomy abode. Fortunately, she was very near home, and Dr. Alec dropped in so often that her visit was far less dismal than she expected. Between them, they actually made Aunt Myra laugh heartily more than once, and Rose did her so much good by letting in the sunshine, singing about the silent house, cooking wholesome messes, and amusing the old lady with funny little lectures on physiology, that she forgot to take her pills and gave up Mum's elixir because she slept so well after the long walks and drives she was beguiled into taking that she needed no narcotic. So the winter flew rapidly away, and it was May before Rose was fairly settled again at home. They called her the monthly Rose because she had spent a month with each of the aunts and left such pleasant memories of bloom and fragrance behind her that all wanted the family flower back again. Dr. Alec rejoiced greatly over his recovered treasure, but as the time drew near when his year of experiment ended, he had many a secret fear that Rose might like to make her home for the next 12-month with Aunt Jessie, or even Aunt Clara for Charlie's sake. He said nothing, but waited with much anxiety for the day when the matter should be decided, and while he waited, he did his best to finish as far as possible the task he had begun so well. Rose was very happy now, being out nearly all day enjoying the beautiful awakening of the world, for spring came bright and early, as if anxious to do its part. The old horse-chestnuts budded round her windows, green things sprung up like magic in the garden under her hands, hardy flowers bloomed as fast as they could, the birds sang blithely overhead, and every day a chorus of pleasant voices cried,
"Good morning, cousin. Isn't it jolly weather?"
No one remembered the date of the eventful conversation which resulted in the doctor's experiment, no one but himself at least. So when the aunts were invited to tea one Saturday, they came quite unsuspiciously, and were all sitting together having a social chat, when Brother Alec entered with 2 photographs in his hand.
"Do you remember that?"
he said, showing one to Aunt Clara, who happened to be nearest.
"Yes, indeed. It is very like her when she came. Quite her sad, unchildlike expression and thin little face with the big dark eyes."
The picture was passed round, and all agreed that it was very like Rose a year ago. This point being settled, the doctor showed the second picture, which was received with great approbation and pronounced a charming likeness. It certainly was, and a striking contrast to the first one, for it was a blooming, smiling face, full of girlish spirit and health, with no sign of melancholy, though the soft eyes were thoughtful, and the lines about the lips betrayed a sensitive nature. Dr. Alec set both photographs on the chimney-piece and, falling back a step or two, surveyed them with infinite satisfaction for several minutes, then wheeled round, saying briefly as he pointed to the two faces,
"Time is up. How do you think my experiment has succeeded, ladies?"
Bless me, so it is,
cried Aunt Plenty, dropping a stitch in her surprise.
Beautifully, dear,
answered Aunt Peace, smiling entire approval.
She certainly has improved, but appearances are deceitful, and she has no constitution to build upon,
croaked Aunt Myra.
I am willing to allow that as far as mere health goes. The experiment is a success,
graciously observed Aunt Jane, unable to forget Rose's kindness to her Mac.
So am I, and I'll go farther, for I really do believe Alec has done wonders for the child. She will be a beauty in 2 or 3 years,
added Aunt Clara, feeling that she could say nothing better than that.
I always knew he would succeed, and I'm so glad you all allow it, for he deserves more credit than you know, and more praise than he will ever get,
cried Aunt Jessie, clapping her hands with an enthusiasm that caused Jamie's little red stocking to wave like a triumphal banner in the air. Dr. Alec made them a splendid bow, looking much gratified, and then said soberly,
"Thank you. Now the question is, shall I go on? For this is only the beginning. None of you know the hindrances I've had, the mistakes I've made, the study I've given the case, and the anxiety I've often felt. Sister Myra is right in one thing. Rose is a delicate creature, quick to flourish in the sunshine, and as quick to droop without it. She has no special weakness, but inherits her mother's sensitive nature, and needs the wisest, tenderest care to keep a very ardent little soul from wearing out a finely organized little body. I think I found the right treatment, and, with you to help me, I believe we may build up a lovely and a noble woman, who will be a pride and comfort to us all."
There, Dr. Alec stopped to get his breath, for he had spoken very earnestly, and his voice got a little husky over the last words. A gentle murmur from the aunts seemed to encourage him, and he went on with an engaging smile, for the good man was slyly trying to win all the ladies to vote for him when the time came.
"Now, I don't wish to be selfish or arbitrary because I am her guardian, and I shall leave Rose free to choose for herself. We all want her, and if she likes to make her home with any of you rather than with me, she shall do so. In fact, I encouraged her visits last winter that she might see what we can all offer her, and judge where she will be happiest. Is not that the fairest way? Will you agree to abide by her choice, as I do?"
Yes, we will,
said all the aunts, in quite a flutter of excitement at the prospect of having Rose for a whole year.
"Good. She will be here directly. Then we will settle the question for another year. A most important year, mind you, for she has got a good start and will blossom rapidly now if all goes well with her. So I beg of you, don't undo my work, but deal very wisely and gently with my little girl. For if any harm come to her, I think it would break my heart."
As he spoke, Dr. Alec turned his back abruptly and affected to be examining the pictures again, but the aunts understood how dear the child was to the solitary man who had loved her mother years ago, and who now found his happiness in cherishing the little Rose who was so like her. The good ladies nodded and sighed, and telegraphed to one another that none of them would complain if not chosen, or ever try to rob Brother Alec of his heart's delight, as the boys called Rose. Just then, a pleasant sound of happy voices came up from the garden, and smiles broke out on all serious faces. Dr. Alec turned at once, saying as he threw back his head,
"There she is. Now for it."
The cousins had been a-maying, and soon came flocking in, laden with the spoils.
"And here is our bonny Scotch rose, with all her thorns about her,"
said Dr. Alec, surveying her with unusual pride and tenderness, as she went to show Aunt Peace her basket full of early flowers, fresh leaves, and curious lichens.
Leave your clutter in the hall, boys, and sit quietly down if you choose to stop here, for we are busy,
said Aunt Plenty, shaking her finger at the turbulent clan, who were bubbling over with the jollity born of spring sunshine and healthy exercise.
Of course we choose to stay. Wouldn't miss our Saturday high tea for anything,
said the chief, as he restored order among his men with a nod, a word, and an occasional shake.
"What is up? A court-martial?"
asked Charlie, looking at the assembled ladies with affected awe and real curiosity, for their faces betrayed that some interesting business was afloat. Dr. Alec explained in a few words, which he made as brief and calm as he could, but the effect was exciting nevertheless, for each of the lads began at once to bribe, entice, and wheedle our cousin to choose his home.
You really ought to come to us for mother's sake, as a relish, you know, for she must be perfectly satiated with boys,
began Archie, using the strongest argument he could think of at the moment.
"Oh, do! We'll never slam."
"Or bounce at you or call you fraid cat, if you only will,"
besought Geordie and Will, distorting their countenances in the attempt to smile with overpowering sweetness.
"And I'll always wash my hands 'fore I touch you, and you shall be my dolly, 'cause Pokey's gone away, and I'll love you hard,"
cried Jamie, clinging to her with his chubby face full of affection.
Brothers and sisters ought to live together, especially when the brother needs someone to make home pleasant for him,
added Charlie, with the wheedlesome tone and look that Rose always found so difficult to resist.
"You had her longest, and it's our turn now. Mac needs her more than you do, Prince, for she's the light of his eyes, he says. Come, Rose, choose us, and I'll never use the musky pomade you hate again as long as I live,"
said Steve with his most killing air, as he offered this noble sacrifice. Mac peered wistfully over his goggles, saying in an unusually wide-awake and earnest way,
"Do, cousin. Then we can study chemistry together. My experiments don't blow up very often now, and the gases aren't at all bad when you get used to them."
Rose, meantime, had stood quite still, with the flowers dropping from her hands, as her eyes went from one eager face to another, while smiles rippled over her own at the various enticements offered her. During the laugh that followed Mac's handsome proposition, she looked at her uncle, whose eyes were fixed on her, with an expression of love and longing that went to her heart.
"Ah, yes,"
she thought.
"He wants me most. I've often longed to give him something that he wished for very much, and now I can."
So, when, at a sudden gesture from Aunt Peace, silence fell, Rose said slowly, with a pretty color in her cheeks and a beseeching look about the room, as if asking pardon of the boys,
"It's very hard to choose when everybody is so fond of me. Therefore, I think I'd better go to the one who seems to need me most."
"No, dear. The one you love the best and will be happiest with,"
said Dr. Alec quickly, as a doleful sniff from Aunt Myra and a murmur of,
"My sainted Caroline,"
made Rose pause and look that way.
"Take time, cousin. Don't be in a hurry to make up your mind. And remember, Codlin's your friend."
added Charlie, hopeful still.
I don't want any time. I know who I love best, who I'm happiest with, and I choose Uncle. Will he have me?
Cried Rose in a tone that produced a sympathetic thrill among the hearers. It was so full of tender confidence and love. If she really had any doubt, the look in Dr. Alec's face banished it without a word, as he opened wide his arms, and she ran into them, feeling that home was there. No one spoke for a minute, but there were signs of emotion among the aunts, which warned the boys to bestir themselves before the waterworks began to play. So they took hands and began to prance about uncle and niece, singing with sudden inspiration the nursery rhyme, "Ring around a rosy." Of course, that put an end to all sentiment, and Rose emerged laughing from Dr. Alec's bosom, with the mark of a waistcoat button nicely imprinted on her left cheek. He saw it, and said with a merry kiss that half effaced it,
"This is my ewe lamb, and I have set my mark on her, so no one can steal her away."
That tickled the boys, and they set up a shout of,
"Uncle had a little lamb."
But Rose hushed the noise by slipping into the circle and making them dance prettily like lads and lasses round a maypole, while Phoebe, coming in with fresh water for the flowers, began to twitter, chirp, and coo, as if all the birds of the air had come to join in the spring revel of the 8 cousins. End of chapter 24. End of 8 Cousins by Louisa May Alcott.